Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dog Trainers Podcast. My name is Mariano. That's Brent. We want to thank you guys so much for listening, and we just continue to be amazed and blown away by all the love and support. So, without further ado, let us dive right in, man. This is episode 31, How to Pick Your Programs. Now, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, all by looking up Dog Trainers Podcast. It's all one word, Dog Trainers Podcast. And we just want to give a quick shout out to a few cities that have been giving us a lot of love lately. So shout outs to Atlanta, Georgia, Gravesend, New York, Lake Stevens, Washington, and Garner, North Carolina. Thank you guys so much for listening, and do stay tuned because we've got some really cool stuff coming up in the works here for you. So we'll dive right in, and I'm going to pass it over to Brent. And the gist of the episode here is just going to be younger trainers not exactly knowing when and how to decide what programs to offer to different clients and how we go about choosing those for ourselves. And without further ado, take it away, man.
Cool. What's up, man? How you been?
I've been good.
Dude, we haven't recorded an episode in 3 weeks. We've had a lot of changes in our lives. We both got new houses. So congratulations to you, man.
Thank you. Congratulations to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we're so excited to get back to this podcast. As Mariano was saying, pretty much how do we go about picking programs for our clients? But most importantly, how do we pick programs to offer to our clients, right? Now, one thing I noticed, so I mentor a lot of dog trainers in the Los Angeles area. And what I've realized is most 99.9% of dog trainers offer privates. That's kind of like extremely like the starting point. We start with some type of private. But I've noticed that not all dog trainers offer group classes, and not all dog trainers offer board and train programs. Why would you, in your opinion, Mariano, why do you think that is?
Why they don't offer board and train programs? I think it's because,
or why they don't offer group classes. But every trainer offers privates.
Yeah, well, and I'll talk about this more later, but I want to break down privates into in-home versus in-kennel, because I have met a lot of dog trainers, depending on what their career has looked like from the beginning, that are really comfortable doing in-homes. And I've met a lot of dog trainers who like work at kennels, who the first time they go to someone's house, they're like weirded out, right? But to get back to your question, so why don't people typically start with group classes or board and trains? Because they're scarier for a lot of different reasons. They're potentially riskier, meaning in a group class situation, you've got several dogs going and several owners going at once. Whereas in a board and train program, you've got the dog in your house or in your facility at all times. And we're talking potential risk. You got to feed and do every other thing, and that kind of stuff weighs on a trainer, So a private lesson is just kind of the dog is in and the dog is out, and there's not really that much risk involved. You're just dealing with one, maybe a few people at a time, but it's one dog, like 2 maximum. So yeah, I think it's less to bounce around in your brain, and it's for that reason less intimidating.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's the case. And, I think for any successful business, again, this is just my opinion. My passion has always been, how can I help as many dogs as possible? Right. So the way I that translated to me in my head is, the more services or the more types of programs that I can offer, the different types of clienteles and dogs that I can help. Right. But also I just kind of had an interest of trying to figure out how to run a group class, how to do private sessions, how to master a board and train program, how to do a day training program. How do I do programs for puppies, that are at a certain interval when they're not vaccinated under 4 months, right? Like there's all these different obstacles that I was like, oh, how can I help more dogs? How can I train more dogs? And there's also kind of this intrinsic desire of like, how do I get better at this stuff, right? How can I figure this? I see a need? How can I fulfill that need? And so what I want to, so when we're looking at programs, pretty much the programs get broken up into 2 different categories. We're either teaching the owners how to train their own dogs to solve their own problems, or we're training the dog to learn how to listen so that we can teach the owners how to solve their own problems, right? These are the general 2 categories we see. And so just to name a few programs, we see, there's board and train programs, there's day training programs where the dog goes home at the end of the day. There's weekly programs where the dog, spends Monday through Friday with you, and then goes home on the weekends to their parents. So those are kind of the we do it for them programs. And then the do it yourself program, the DIYs, would be your group classes, your private training, or some type of combination of the 2. or sometimes even a semi-private group class is also something. I've had a lot of friends who had puppies around the same time. We do a semi-private, which is, you have some of the benefits of a group class, but it's private enough and where it's not as hectic as a traditional group class you would do at a park or at a building.
Right.
So we kind of have these two categories. Now, each of these services, they kind of lend themselves to a couple different types of scenarios, right? Or different types of dogs, different types of clientele. So I guess I kind of want to dive into that a little bit. Would you mind helping me out with that, Mark?
Yeah, so let's start with price point, because I think that's usually the one that's on the forefront of any dog owner's mind, is like, how much is this going to cost me, right? I don't think that they quite,
Yeah.
just based on the amount of people that I've spoken to, and you tell me if you disagree.
Yeah.
I almost never get a phone call with people worried about like how much of their time it's going to take. Right?
Right.
It's always
Good
like
point.
it's always like, so how much is it? And you can hear them like bracing themselves on the other end of the phone, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
price
mm-hmm.
point I think is a big one, and there was something in particular that I wanted to bring up. So definitely it can be a barrier to entry, of course. I mean, that's why, just in a market system period, that's why there are several programs, right? Otherwise there'd be one price, one program, and like there you go. And there, I do know of a
Right.
couple kennels that do that, or at least they do very limited programs, you know. And I think we've talked about them a little bit before, and you know, that's for a later time. But one thing I really want to get into when we talk about price being a potential barrier to entry is you have to discuss the pain point. I put pain point in quotes, right, for owners. And this is something that I heard Sean talk about, Sean O'Shea of The Good Dog, right? Shout out to you guys. Um, Sean O'Shea and The Good Dog, for those of you guys who may not know, they work, I think they work exclusively e-collar. I'm pretty sure that's true. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and they work almost exclusively reactive dogs, or shy, nervous, like behavioral stuff, right? Kind of like Tommy Davis a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
they've marketed themselves that way on purpose, which is totally fine. You know, I'm sure it's the same thing as Tommy. It's just it's what you like, right? So it's what you do. Now, with that being said, you're dealing with dogs that are potentially more risky, right? Not only a danger to maybe yourself or other dogs, but to themselves, or just to, you know, weird things like there's escape artist dogs, there's whatever. What if the dog gets loose? What if, you know, so for that reason, Sean was talking, I want to say it was an episode of one of his like Saturday Q&As that they do. Um, they were talking about the like pain point for owners, meaning I charge enough. I obviously don't want to charge people like more than is fair or whatever the case, but I charge enough that I know that if the owners are shelling out this kind of cash, they're going to take the training seriously, even after the dog leaves
Right.
us. And, you know, and it has that lasting impression. And I can, you know, I'll be realistic with you guys that as a trainer, or even just as a business owner, period, you do have to factor that sometimes, because it sounds dumb and it shouldn't be this way. But sometimes, for whatever reason, if you don't charge comparable, let's say, to other trainers in the area, people automatically assume that you're of lesser quality. And, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
That's
I
true.
did this little test, you know, and I'm sure Brent, you know, you've done a similar test. But when I first moved back to Los Angeles, it was like 2015 or 16, something around there. Um, I was trying to figure out my rates. So I would offer this person this much, that person that much. And I wasn't trying to like gouge people. It was just, I'm just trying things out, trying to figure out where I fit into this whole thing. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
did notice, and it was actually it was quite pronounced. It wasn't even like that close. The less expensive the lessons, the people were more likely to cancel or reschedule on me
100%.
by a
Yep.
lot.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
So yeah, you know, that was just something. And you know, and there's a couple other things to you know, take into account. Like I think that a fair point to bring up, and I want to hear you riff on this a little bit, is just
Mm-hmm.
one has to weigh realistically. This is the trainer's job, by the way, so you guys pay attention. Realistically, weigh the workload, right? Because as trainers, you know, sometimes as a younger trainer or a newer trainer or whatever the case, you're uncomfortable telling a potential client no. You know, they're like, can I do some private lessons for this dog that's got these issues? And you're like, you know, I don't think that that would be good for you. But a lot of people are too afraid to say no, you know, so they do their best with what they think the owners are okay with, which would be privates or group classes or whatever the case. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
since we're the ones who have the experience and know that this dog potentially could go this way, this way, this way, with the different variables, the time it takes, and so on, it's our job to explain to the owner what the workload is going to look like. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify the question. Are you talking about the workload that's needed to get the dog from point A to point B, or?
Yeah.
or the
So the way that we had it broken down was the workload that's needed to get the dog from point A to point B, and I think that kind of goes hand in hand with, what do the owners like? What do they expect from the dog? What's going on with the dog, and and so on.
Got it, got it, got it. Yes, yes, yes. So yeah, again, it kind of goes back to, how much work do we have to do as trainers and how much work do the owners have to do so that we can totally come together and create success for this dog,
Right.
right? So obviously, some of that we can actually talk a little bit more in the behavior because I think a lot of this is predicated on the actual dog's behavior and what kind of things that they're suffering from. But let's say we have a dog who we know for a fact is going to need a lot of conditioning, and we know that that lot of conditioning cannot be done by the owner, because let's say they're a mother of four and she's very active in a lot of other things other than just her kids, right? She's not going to have the time to do those things. And so in essence, what people are really paying for is they're paying for someone's time, right? So we tend to see the less amount of time that the trainer has to spend, the more money they save, right? So pretty much group classes and private sessions are always going to be more lower priced than a board and train or any type of takeover programs where the trainers are doing a majority of the conditioning and repetition,
Right.
right? And that's the exchange, right? So if we as trainers understand, like, so someone might come in saying, I want group classes, but the funny thing is their dog is lunging and barking and snarling at things, and they might want group classes because in their mind they go, my dog has a socialization problem, therefore I need to be around dogs to socialize. It's true, to an extent, it's just out of order, right? So that happens all the time. Dogs who have socialization issues, people want to jump into group classes, and they're looking at this beautiful low price point of a couple $100s for a group class, and they're really attractive to it. But the amount of work it's going to take to get that dog to not lunge and bark, and funny enough, even the group class may or may not be the right environment for that dog to try and learn these
Hmm.
things, in a healthy way. That has to be weighed out in our pricing. So sometimes people are attracted to price points, but they don't necessarily know the amount of work that has to go into the dog, and that's our job to really educate people. It shouldn't be about price points. One thing that my mentor used to always tell me: if if the conversation you have with a client, if the first thing you guys talk about is price points, then you already messed up in your teaching and your explanation or your evaluation. Because our job as trainers is that we really need to talk about the issues at hand, explain to them the process, and then give recommendations of, whether we need to do board and train, private training, why we need to do it, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Make
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's at this point here that I have to, admit, as a younger trainer, I mean, there have been many times that I can think of just off the top of my head right now that it's like I knew better, but I was
Mm-hmm.
too nervous to ask for that. Because here's another thing when we're talking price point. As a younger
Mm-hmm.
trainer, and you're absolutely right, by the way, I would just add one more thing when you're talking about essentially you're paying for a person's time. I would throw expertise in there with time, and I would also throw risk
Mhm. And
factor, right?
efficiency
Efficiency,
and overhead and all these and
right?
team and what they have available to them as resources. It's a bunch of
Sure,
different things.
like a mechanic, right? They've got the tools, they've got everything else, but
Yeah.
all that stuff costs money, which is why they charge whatever their hourly is, right?
Right.
So
Exactly. Exactly.
with that being said, as a younger trainer, to get back to the story, I would kind of decide for myself in the evaluation process and would talk to the owners about, yeah, I think that just based on this, I think you'd be better off going with a board and train program. I don't think group classes would be a good idea for this dog. It could be a matter of safety. It could be a matter, like you said, of just not being the right environment for that dog to grow and learn. And
Hmm.
and then owners are like, yeah, it's just money or something, and could we just do this instead? And I'm like, okay, and I would just kind of go with it. So
Yeah.
it was a mistake on my part because I can totally understand where they're coming from, right? Board and train programs, typically speaking, are not cheap. I struggle to find anywhere in America really where they're not at least upwards of like $1,000, $2,000, depending on how long it is, right? So,
Right.
and that's not nothing. That's a lot of money. So,
Right.
as a younger trainer, you get nervous about asking for that kind of money. You almost
Hmm.
don't feel like
100%.
deserve that kind of cash. Even private lessons you sell for pretty cheap, and and so on. And so that is something that was totally my fault for doing, and I should have done board and trains with these dogs, and I'm confident the dogs would have done better, and so on and so on.
Right. Right. Price point again, I feel it should be the last thing that we worry about. As long as we're good at explaining and educating people, right? Because the consumer is going to constantly be looking for prices that are quote unquote affordable, but at the same time, what has to happen is they also need to know what the market is, right? Like if I have older clients, if I have clients in their 70s or late mid 70s, back when they were kids, dog trainings were like, 20 bucks a session, back in the day. So when we charge them in the hundreds, a hundred something, hundred some change, they're blown away. Like, what? Even though we know that the dollar has changed over time, it still seems ridiculous to some people because they don't know what the market is, or they don't know what the market in that area is. And it's really hard for me to say like price points or like what we should be charging for our programs because it's based on region, right? So like obviously LA pricing is very different than, let's say, in the South somewhere, right? Someplace in the rural South, dog training might be a lot cheaper than in LA, right? But the idea is you need to be competitive with whatever your competition. You need to understand that supply and demand. And you also need to make sure that whatever that price is, that it is, whether it's for the privates, the board and trains, the group classes, that price point makes people feel invested into whatever program it is that you're recommending for them. So, group classes tend to be the lowest price. Why is that? Because a person is sharing time with a group of other people, and the amount of energy the trainer actually has to put in is relatively low, right? Now, from a trainer standpoint, I get to actually help a group of people with my expertise at the same time, and I get to be good at it, right? And that's my passion. So it's a win-win. I get to help more people, they get to spend less money, and the dogs get to get trained, right? So that's why a group class can be really beneficial. Now, as we were saying earlier, group classes are scary. They're super scary. So those of you guys who are interested in learning how to do group classes, find someone in your area that runs group classes well and watch them, right? And watch them. That's what I would recommend. And then what we were talking. Then the next one would be private training, right? Private training, we kind of see the price points are always higher than group classes because it's your privatized time, your focus. You're focusing on that specific person's needs, and that's perhaps in their specific environment to focus on specific issues. Versus group classes have more of a general curriculum, right? The general curriculum or general goals that we kind of follow in order to get our dogs from point A to point B in the class curriculum. This one is more privatized and specialized for the clients at hand. So these two tend to be the cheapest forms of training for people. However, as I'm sure you can relate, there are people who we know this privates or group classes would not suit their dogs for success. Right. Would you mind? Let's talk about the other two variables, behaviors and the training capacity and all that stuff, of what kind of things would maybe push us against or disqualify people from being able to do group classes or private training.
I mean, without getting too technical about it, there's something that I can think of straight off the bat, which is, you remember, I mean, because the obvious stuff would be like a reactive dog, right? Something that's it's clear. It's a risk factor. You can't bring a reactive dog. I don't care if it's dogs or people or whatever the case, because you're risking something, right? So, but then there's other things that would disqualify a dog, in my opinion, from a group class that maybe isn't as obvious as like an aggressive dog. Like I think of a really shy, nervous dog like Snowball. Snowball, for those of you guys who don't know, was a dog that Brent and I trained in LA. It's been, I don't know, a few years now. And she was the sweetest thing in the world. There was no aggression in her at all, but she was the most nervous dog, man. She was shut down by every little thing. And so that dog would have not flourished one bit.
Would be horrible. Let me interrupt you real quick. So I just started a group class this past yesterday, and there are 9 puppies under the age of 8 months in that class. And 6 of those 8 puppies are nervous of humans. And the reason for it is because of COVID. These dogs could not have gotten out of the house to get socialized. The parents weren't walking them as much because of the scare of the virus. There's so many different reasons. But I went to go give these puppies treats, and half of them were scared of
Mhm.
me. It's crazy. But anyways, I didn't want to cut you off. But
No, you're
yeah,
okay.
that's
No,
yeah,
well, it's a
that's true.
fascinating point because exactly what I was
Yeah.
looking at it getting into was not only wouldn't Snowball have done well in a group class at all,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
I think it would have done her more harm than good, at least in that
Yeah.
stage in her life. Last time we saw her, she
Mhm.
was she was a different dog, but that was hard work, and it was a board and train situation.
Mhm.
But anyway, just to touch on price point one more time, by the way, trainers, when you're factoring the potential downside of a program, you have to understand, even if the group class is the cheapest option for the owner, owners just from a business standpoint, dog training or no dog training, you're being paid money to solve a problem, right? My dog needs training, my
Right.
dog needs whatever.
Right. So you should be effective in solving that
Correct,
problem.
because if you're not, it doesn't matter if it was the cheaper option, you didn't even solve the problem. So it was just money down the
Right.
drain. They would have been better off spending a little bit more, but actually getting the result. And it's our
Right.
job to delineate those differences of like, look, man, I know it costs more money. I understand, I have a client right now who it wasn't about money. I mean, they seem like they're in a good spot financially, but the mom was having a really hard time letting go of her dogs. I've got two dogs from one family right now for a 3-week board and train each of them, and
Mhm.
she had like a really hard time letting them go. She texts me like on the regular, but it was there's these different circumstances that would kind of make it difficult for someone to go with a certain program. But it was my job as the trainer to look at what these dogs were experiencing, what her ultimate goals were, and say, you know what, I think this is the way to go. Now,
Mhm.
when we get back into behaviors, yes, an aggressive dog is not a good candidate for group classes. I don't think a
Mhm.
really nervous dog is a good candidate for group classes. I think that COVID has made things very difficult. I think that, and for more reasons than one, because nobody wants to do group classes, or at least or less than
True.
before anyway, so there's all these different things in effect there. And I think that the owners, when we're talking about behavior, their expectations have to be weighed, with everything else, as well as the environment itself. Meaning, for an example, I just want to hear your opinion on this, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
let's say, you go and do an eval with a person,
Mhm.
you talk to them, and, nothing is horribly out of the ordinary. Let's say they seem reasonable. They seem like their expectations are somewhat realistic, whatever the case, but the environment just may not be conducive. Maybe it's, like a single mom with 5 kids, or, and,
Right. Right. Right.
so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think sometimes the environment, again, it's all depending on the behavior, but we know as trainers that sometimes the environment exacerbates a problem,
Hmm.
right? So like if I have a household with a bunch of, kids, and pretty much if the house is like a circus, well, the dog will act like he lives at a circus, right? So if the kids are here and the mom's there and the parents are all over the place, and there's a lot of yelling and screaming and disorganization, well, it's really hard within that process to try and get a dog to be patient, have self-control, anchored, etc.,
Right.
right? Sometimes, depending on the behavior as well, if I have a dog who the home is actually what's triggering the behavior, be it like being territorial, being reactive. Maybe it's one of the family members the dog's super possessive of. Like there's a number of different things it could be. But yeah, is the environment conducive to training? Do they have quiet areas where maybe they could do practice the dog? If they don't have quiet area, do they live in an apartment? Like what is that environment? And could we potentially see someone successfully being able to train that dog given a certain curriculum in that environment, effectively,
Right. And
you
I
know?
think that when we talk about the environment being conducive, you know, I think that we also have to look at things from the trainer's perspective. So,
Mhm, mhm,
let's
mhm,
say we do have a dog. Okay. So let's kind of step away from the single mom with the 5 kids. Let's talk about now one young person, right? Like first time dog owner, male, female, doesn't really matter.
mhm,
And they go and adopt a
mhm.
dog from the shelter. And let's say whatever the
Right,
person is, male or female, the dog is the opposite of that, right? Male dog, female owner, or
right,
vice versa. And
right,
so they adopt a dog. Dog is severely under socialized because whatever their history may be. And so they become protective. Now, in that
right,
circumstance, you've got a protective dog and this random stranger coming to the house being the trainer. That may not be
right.
the smartest thing for you to do. So that's
Nope.
why it's up to us to say, hey, you know what? I don't think private in home lessons are going to be the way to go for you. I think maybe we can get away with lessons at my house, or we should look into a board and train or
At the
at the
park
park,
or
right?
something.
Neutral
Yeah.
ground, right? So these are all things to consider, right? So these are just a couple of the things I wanted to throw out there. But let me hear you talk a little bit about this, Brent, because I think just in my
Mhm.
daily life, maybe you and I haven't talked about this that much, just because we've both been so busy, with our moving and everything. But just in life in general, I think one thing that you and I have enough experience with to be honest about and realistic about is, can the owners safely do what they have to do? Can they train
Mm.
this dog or manage this
Mhm.
dog?
Mhm. Mhm. I have a story for that,
Okay.
actually. So this has happened one time, and it really actually no, it's happened multiple times, but only one time this drastic. Where against my so like I met a client, their dog was
Mm,
very human aggressive, and it got to the point where they the dog was on like its fourth or fifth bite, and biting family, drawing blood, needing stitches, all of these
mm,
things. And in my evaluation and assessment of this dog, I knew in the bottom of my heart, like this dog, if this dog doesn't get help right away, if they don't change their management system right away, if they, if this dog just doesn't get treated, like he's gonna bite someone else again, and he's gonna get put down and get put to
mhm,
sleep,
mhm,
right? So I knew all this. However, I let the client kind of control the transaction a little
mm,
bit. They wanted to do private sessions, and they assured me that they would be able to follow all the rules that I give them, because I was really trying my best to say, guys, this dog's going to bite another person. And if this dog bites one more person, luckily the dog's bit 5 person, but has only had 2 reports to the
right.
city. If the dog gets reported a third time, this dog is
Yeah.
done. This dog is done. And you know what? I put faith in these people, but one of the big things that you have to do is you have to look at the. It's kind of like remember, I think we've said this before, but like if a dog has chewed up 7 beds
Stop giving him beds.
and
Yeah.
stop giving him
Right.
beds, right? So if a dog has bitten 8, 6, 7 people, there's something that is wrong in that environment that is allowing this dog to bite so
Right.
often, right? It could be a careless owner. It could be a bad management system. It could be a faulty baby gate. It could be, the gardener leaves the side gate open every now and then, and that's what leads to the bite. It could be all these different things that are out of the owner's control sometimes. And it's crazy because I've had, anyways, in this particular scenario, the long story short is I've agreed to help someone with privates before, knowing that it wasn't the right decision. And 2 weeks into our private sessions, because the dog was still at the home where the bad behavior existed, the dog bit another person, and a week later had to get put
Right.
down. And I felt like I fucking failed. I felt like I should have said something, and I was so pissed at the owners, but in actuality, I was mad at myself. I was so mad at the fact that I knew better and I didn't stand up for what it is that I wanted to say. And so when we talk about realistically, can owners safely train their dogs? We have to look at, are they capable of, it kind of should they have even owned this
Right.
dog,
Should they
right?
have even owned this dog?
Like should they have even owned this dog, right? And in a scenario like that, like I feel that if I would have held my ground, if I could have done it, but again, there's a bunch of things I could have said, but this is just a tragic story. Now there's been other scenarios where you know sometimes it's the owner, right? Like the dog's training for recall, and the dog person gets really cocky, and then prematurely lets the dog off leash, and then the dog, runs away, and then they find him 2 days later.
Right.
So luckily, I haven't had any crazy stories like the one other than the one where the dog gets put down. But yeah, this is an example of what we're talking about. Can the owner safely train their dogs at their house, right, and be
Well,
successful?
and let me mention something that may or may not be a little controversial, let's say. Okay. So, from a trainer's
Mhm.
perspective, you can agree or disagree. Okay. It's not like when the owner assures you, because you're absolutely right. I've been in that position too. When the owner
Mhm.
assures you they can do this, they can blah, 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 it's not that they're lying to you. I don't think anyway.
Mhm.
But as the professional, you almost have to look at them, and I want this to come off with a grain of salt, okay? I don't mean this in any kind of derogatory way. You have to look at things as a professional and say, listen, and I wouldn't say this out loud, but this is like my thought process. Like, look, man, I'm sure you think you could do this. I don't think
Yeah.
I don't think
You
that you're lying to me, but I don't think that you realize how serious this is.
yeah, but and also the proof is in the pudding.
Right.
If the dog's bitten 6
Correct,
people,
correct. So
well, why didn't you think it was serious the first time enough to make a change or train, you know
exactly.
what I
And
mean?
so and so when we're
So, yeah.
talking about that, when we're talking to the owner face to face, I tend to kind of bring that up a little bit. And I'll be totally honest in a very respectful,
Yeah.
professional manner. I dig into them a little bit and I say, like, look, I hear you and everything, but this dog has bitten 7 people over the past 5 years.
Mhm.
I don't think that you're doing what you need to be doing, and so I really think that
Yeah.
you should, let me take the dog and train him, and then, and you have to wake up,
Yep.
and realize just
Yep.
what's going on here, and I've got stories like that myself, and, just so that
Yep.
you and I can kind of have that, like, little moment of extra bonding of, like, I won't give too much of the story because it's the same, but in LA, you know, I lived in LA for, I don't know, years and years. For people who don't know, I moved to Arizona, like, less than 2 years ago. And I had a client who I can't say too much because it was a more notable person and I signed an NDA. Okay. So they had two big, beautiful dogs that were of a certain like kennel that people know because they have like a YouTube channel and so on and so on. Okay. Uh, Wealthy, well known person, really big, expensive dogs. And this person was like a very archetype, like Hollywood big shot kind of person, meaning they say all the right, like they're just
Mhm.
a huge personality, and they say all the right stuff. I'd say, here, do this, 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 and they go, oh yeah, 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 and they were just like all about it, but they
Mhm.
never did the work, and so
Mhm.
it did come to a point to where I had to just let this client go because I knew from the beginning, and this person clearly had like the means to do board and trains. They just didn't want to give the
Mhm.
dogs up, and
Mhm.
they would rather do privates, and I went, "Okay, same thing." They kinda control the situation. I almost ended up doing, like, a private lesson a day, which I didn't wanna do, but they wanted to do it, and I was like, "You guys realize it's this much?" And they were like, "Sure, whatever," they had the money.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
all the lessons in the world, I mean, the dogs were trained and everything, but it just didn't change anything. The problem was still there. The
Right.
owners weren't doing their jobs, and the worst thing about having clients like that, they're, again, notable person, is you come to the house one day and there's like other notable people around, and you as the dog trainer look like a moron because these dogs aren't behaving, and I'm like,
Right.
okay, this is like becoming damaging now to my business at this point. So
Right. Right.
I had to let this person go, but it's a shame
Right.
because they had all the means in the world, and they just didn't do what needed to be done. They just didn't see it, I guess.
Yeah, and I think and that's part of, just the owner's training capacity. Like, are they willing or do they have the availability to do
Right.
so? I want to go back to kind of this: can they safely or effectively train their dogs topic? Because I know we've kind of been talking about some kind of dramatic examples, right, of like dogs who are bit 6 people, but like it could even be as simple as the dog who is all over the place, bouncing off the
Sure.
walls, living in a house with people who are bouncing all over the walls and aren't structured, et cetera, right? So when we can see that what the dog is dealing with behaviorally is actually being created by the environment itself, for us to go and think that, oh, these people are going to change overnight and be able to um, you know uh, follow a certain protocol and management system and all this stuff, and then they'll be able to do it. That's really wishful thinking, right? There's no way that all the hope in the world can make that happen. And so it's just something to really keep in mind, where can owners safely and effectively train their dogs in that
Yeah, and
environment?
and since you bring that up, I'm gonna piggyback because that's an excellent point, right? So, okay, you're right. Let's talk about some less extreme examples. But let's stay on the topic of
Mhm.
safety. And as we said with the group classes, not all lack of safety is just because the dog is aggressive. Okay, so let's talk about an
Right.
example that's way toned down, but very much an issue of safety. I board
Mhm.
and trained a Carolina dog. The more kind of the more like feral type of dog, right? So
Yep. Yep. Yep.
so out here in Phoenix, Arizona, in the Central Valley of Arizona, there's like Native American reservations. You know what I mean? And so working with a lot of
Mhm.
rescues, like I
Mhm.
do as part of the Phoenix Metro Chamber Foundation, shout out.
Mhm. Mhm.
We take on a lot of dogs that are from the reservation, a lot of Carolina dogs, and so because they're just kind of feral, and we pick them up. And so Carolina dogs, one thing that I've been noticing with them, They're highly trainable. They're smart. They're hardly like aggressive or anything like that. But man, they are super escape artists. They have huge anxiety because they're like very feral. Like even the bloodline of Carolina dogs. If you guys look up a Carolina dog, it's an interesting breed. And so they have a hard time crate training, at least the ones that I've dealt with so far. And you get into potential risk there. The dog could escape. The dog could hurt themselves in the crate. The dogs could,
Mhm,
I had one
mhm,
destroy one of
mhm.
my crates. And like, as a trainer, I'm sure everybody who's listening has dealt with this where it's like, dogs will bend up the crate, but it's still workable. So you bend it back and you live with it, right?
Mhm.
Until it's
Mhm.
like gone, right? Just to save cost. So
Right.
this dog, man, destroyed my crate, no longer usable. And it pulled in, like, not only pulled the bars and bent them around, it broke
Man.
some off to the point to where there's like sharp bars sticking inside the crate. And
Right,
I'm
right,
like, oh
right.
shit. Oh, and by the way, this happened within a matter of like 25 minutes because my girlfriend was home and she called me and was like, hey, get your ass home now. So,
Mhm.
so the owner, I recommended that they get like one of those heavier duty crates, the one that doesn't really have bars that the dog can like grab onto, because I don't want them breaking their teeth. I don't want them like, there's
Mhm,
all these
mhm.
different opportunities for things to go sideways.
The tiger cage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I've
I
seen
have a
those.
tiger cage, the one that I bought for Zeus, but
Yeah,
then
yeah.
there's things called like impact crates, and Sean O'Shea put me onto those impact crates, which they're like
Mm,
aircraft aluminum, and they're not bars. Like they have openings obviously so the dog can breathe and you can see them and everything, but it's largely like enclosed so the dog doesn't really have anything to grab with their mouth, you know.
got it,
And
got it, got it,
it's
got it.
obviously extremely durable and so on, and they tried their best to make it a sleek, smooth interior so the dog just has nothing to injure themselves on, because Lord knows they try, man, trying to get
Mhm.
out. So there's all these different
Mhm, mhm.
opportunities for risk factor. And again, it's not necessarily a bite. If you're bored and training that dog, it's like, how do you call the owner and be like, hey man, I lost your dog. Hey man, your dog,
Mhm.
hung
Mhm.
himself with a, you hear those weird horror stories of like his collar got stuck on this and that and blah blah blah.
Oh, so grim, so grim.
But yeah, so I just wanted to mention that, but we can move on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think, uh, I think it takes experience, and it definitely takes, courage and confidence in yourself as a dog trainer for us to just maintain complete honesty with
Right.
them, right? When we're dealing so far, we've talked about price points and just different behaviors that exist, that kind of affect what programs may or may not benefit the dog and the owners, for their goals. But we have to be completely honest with what we know to be true in the process of dog training, because sometimes people, they have romanticized ideas about how dog training should work, or they have, they under or overestimate the amount of work that needs to be done. They under or overestimate, how much time that they have, and realistically whether they'll be able to have it or get it done. And this kind of brings me to our third topic that we want to talk about, which is like the owner's availability or capacity for training in
Mhm.
general. And I guess kind of just to start this off, there are people that we meet that just don't naturally have what it takes to train a dog, right? Or to train their
Right.
dog, right? And there could be so many different factors. It could be emotional blocks, it could be their nature. They could just be very, very sweet. The girl that I'm dating right now, we have a very sweet story, but she's a lover. She loves her dog so, so much, and it's her first time she's ever had a dog. And she doesn't, I wouldn't say she spoils it, because she does some of the protocols and stuff that I tell her, but it's not her nature to tell this dog what to do on a regular basis, which isn't
Mhm.
horrible. But there are some people who have problematic dogs that their nature could not necessarily handle or train that dog without professional
Mm.
help. Yeah. So what other things do you think would affect kind of the owner's training capacity?
The owner's time. Does the owner even have the
Mm,
time to do it? Because again, you consider the owner who's like, yeah, 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 I can do this, I can do this. I'm a nurse. I work 46 hours a week. You know,
mhm,
so it's like,
mhm.
yeah, yeah, you might have to go with something a little different there. Does the owner, you're kind of talking about, does the owner have like the capacity in terms of personality, right? Like, could they do it? I think a lot of it also comes down to, does the owner even see the problem? Because a lot of times that's an issue. And that was a story that just before we got on, I was telling you, I just wanted to touch very briefly. And it was, I just got a call the day before yesterday, I want to say. And it
Mhm.
was by a very nice guy named DJ. DJ says, "Hey man, I wanted to look into your training programs for my neighbor." And I go, uh, okay. I'm a little confused, right? So I'm like, okay, sure. So he's telling me the story, and the story goes, my neighbor has an aggressive pit something mix, has bitten other dogs in the neighborhood already, has gotten into it with
Mhm.
other people in the neighborhood for this reason already. Mind you, this is the neighbor, not the guy who called.
Mhm. Mhm.
And my neighbor and I aren't really friends. I don't really like the guy for different, different reasons. Like not right.
Okay.
So I'm sitting there on the phone like, okay. So he's like, so here's the thing. Is there something I can buy for him, like a package or like a gift card or something to where I can give to him in hopes that he'll just go with it and just do the training? And
That's
and this
awesome.
is what I told him. I was like, "Look, man, you're such a nice guy, but let me tell you why that's not gonna work. Because I don't really care what your guys' friendship is like or why. If he's not looking for training, you can buy him the most prestigious dog training program in the world. He's gonna maybe do it and then not do anything with it. Because obviously he doesn't
Right.
recognize that there's a problem. Otherwise, he would be looking into training, as he should.
Right.
And people are funny like that, especially if you guys aren't friends and you're like, hey, I bought you lessons with a dog trainer. They're just going to be like, who said I need lessons? They're
Yeah, right.
immediately their back.
You trying to tell me
Yeah,
something? What?
immediately their back goes up. They're like, well, you know what, Phil, mow your lawn or whatever. And it's like, look, man,
Yeah.
let's not
Yeah,
make
you
this
suck.
emotional. But
That's
people
funny.
are funny like that. So it's like, look, man, I can appreciate what you're trying to do. I think that you're the greatest guy ever, but save your money. Don't.
Yeah, that is funny. That's a really, really funny story. Um, all right, cool. So owners training capacity, right? Do they have the time? Do they have the personality or the capacity to be able to take care of the problems at
Right. Do they even
hand?
see the
Um,
problem?
yeah, do they even see the problem? I mean, and also I think it's kind of part of capacity, but like patience. Like I met people who are just so impatient with their animal, be it a puppy, be it a dog they just rescued, whatever it is. They're just impatient, impatient, impatient. And there's been so many times that really like our job as trainers is just to try and buy the dog a little bit more time so that they can actually impress their
Right,
owners,
right.
right? So these are the main variables that we see. So price points definitely affect the type of programs we offer. What the dog's actual behavior is that affects what kind of recommendations we can make, and what is the owner's availability like, what is their patience like, their personality, what is the training capacity of the owner. And so these are all the three variables that we have to take into account when thinking about different programs. Um, I guess Mariano, I kind of wanted to just riff some questions off of you, and maybe you could riff some questions off of me,
Yeah.
because every program that are common in dog training, they have their pros and they have their cons. So if we were to talk about, let's say, private training,
Mhm.
right? What is a pro and what is a con in your eyes? It doesn't have to be one for one, just as many as. So, what are some pros that you think private trainings offer
Okay,
people?
pros. In today's world, social distancing is a possibility. Scheduling is a lot easier because you're not dealing with a group of people. You get to keep your dog at your house. Um, in my case in particular, I don't know if I know, actually, I do know that there are a lot of trainers that don't do this. And I know you do too. Um, I give
Mhm,
them actual homework, written out homework,
mhm, mhm,
because
mhm.
for a lot of people, sometimes they're just like, here, do this, this, this for the week. And so people are like, okay. Um, so I'm going to put that as a pro, not a con, because I do give homework, and I know you do too. And I think if you guys are listening, write up homework. Um,
Mhm.
Other pros, let's see.
Even if it's just a text or an email, like that,
Correct,
just document that homework.
correct. Because I'm not gonna waste too much time on it. But we did an episode called "Moving Through Phases of Training," and owners don't know how to do that. You can show them how to do this, and you can show them how to do that, and they won't. Most times, they won't take the initiative to move from this to that. If you write out the homework, it's like, look, man, today do this, 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 and then tomorrow we're moving on to corrections. You know, so
Right.
so here's a pro and a con, and it depends. Okay, the dog and the owner do the work together, and so that could
Hmm.
be a blessing or a curse, or a curse, depending on what the issue is. Let's say that the dog is very much dismissive of the owner. Well, that means that the owner is
Hmm.
going to have a little bit more of an uphill battle than we would,
Mm.
but the owner gets to
Hmm.
go ahead and earn their stripes with the dog, and you get that relationship under control.
Yeah.
Another pro is from the trainer's perspective, let's keep it real. It's less time, it's less risk, it's less overhead, it's less all kinds
Hmm.
of stuff.
You make more money per
You
the
make
hour,
more money
you
per the
know?
hour. That's 100% true. Um,
Yep.
and frankly, it's just kind of easier. Like sometimes, I don't know if you're the same as me, Brent, or if anybody listening is the same as me. And mind you, guys, I just moved here, so I'm still kind of getting settled in terms of client base, and I've been very lucky with how quickly my client base has been growing. Um, my year fluctuates. Right now, I have 4 board and trained dogs with potential for like 2 more that I've been talking to on the phone lately. But like a
Hmm.
month ago, I had no board and trains, but just private lessons like crazy.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I got to be honest, man. Like in a busy day of privates, when it's just your dogs at home, it is kind of nice to come home and know the work is done. Whereas it's
Hmm.
like today, I only had 1 private, but considering the drive and blah blah blah, and it's still warm out here, by the way. It's still 100 plus out here. So, uh, you're driving all day, you're in the sunlight, you get home, and you've still got your dogs to work. You know, and so
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
there are some pros, and and then for the owner's perspective, again, if you just kind of share the workload, one owner, one dog, and you guys do it all versus one trainer training however many dogs. Um,
Right.
some obvious cons: the trainers don't get as much hands-on time with the dogs. For
Right.
that reason, a lot of things can't be offered. Like I know, at the kennel that you and I used to work at, and I do something similar. I forget if you do too these days. Is board and train, as long as you complete your follow-ups, you get a certain guarantee of follow-ups. You
Hmm.
can't really
Hmm.
do that kind of thing with privates because essentially, if you're doing
No.
hour-long lessons, that means you get 6 hours with that dog, and that's
Yeah.
about it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
the owners are another variable that the trainer has to account for. Like if you're telling your dog or your owner how to socialize and blah blah blah, you potentially get that text message of like, "Hey, so my dog bit that other dog at Starbucks today," or
Hmm.
But just to name a few.
Right. Right. Yeah, I know. I think we have less control over the variables, right? And what we're doing is we're really trying to do our best to make sure that the owner knows the goals, that it's clear, that their technique is on point, and we have to try our best to give the owners all the tools that they need to be successful. But the only thing we cannot guarantee in private training is that they will actually do their work. you
Right.
know, we can really do our best. But okay, that was a great list of pros and cons for
Let me
privates.
ask you a question then.
Uh,
So, and we
yeah,
can get
go
into the
ahead.
others if you want to after, but here's
Sure,
a question for you that, I know we didn't dive into kind of on purpose just because we wanted to keep this pretty cut and dry, and maybe we can do this at a later episode. But as a
sure.
rough outline, real quick, uh, where do you find benefit for hybrid programs? Meaning, I know you and I have had clients, I think together actually, and if not, like independently, but we were like, just around each other because I was in LA, where let's
Mhm,
say maybe you start as privates and you realize the owners would be better off as a board and train. So you just convert it over and, so something
mhm,
like that.
mhm,
What are your
mhm.
thoughts on that kind of thing?
So yeah, so sometimes hybrid programs they you don't plan them, and sometimes you do plan
Right.
them, right? So there's been some situations where I've started someone off in a private program, and they had no clue how hard the work was. Like they have no clue about it. And so 2 sessions in, they go, "This is tough. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do a board and train program." Right now, any type of board and train program that hopefully, and this is not always the case because there's so many different generations of dog trainers out right now, but hopefully, when you do a board and train program, that you guys do have some type of follow up process after, where you're able to teach the owners what to do and teach them how to follow through and keep progressing their relationships with their dogs. That's ideal. So that would kind of be a hybrid of board and train, and then also private trainings post training.
Right.
Now, a couple of things that I've done is I can do hybrid programs within my group classes and my private trainings, right? So for example, I might have someone who has a dog in privates, um, who is slightly reactive towards other dogs, right? Lunges, pulling, etc. So in private training, we're able to get that under control. We're able to teach the owners how to manage the dog, how to control the dog, how to develop obedience tools to get that dog to pay more attention and be less kind of like spacey or all over the place with the owner.
Impulsive. Yeah.
And then impulsive, yeah. And then sometimes when that happens, when we get the dog to a certain point, then the dog is a great candidate for higher level group
Right.
classes, right? And that's where now the owner's new skill set now has to be put to a different test or put to a different level of difficulty. And it's through that process where the owner learns how to navigate their dog's skills around groups of dogs and strangers and people at the park or in public. Now we start saying that they become better dog handlers for their specific dog because they're now put in that semi-controlled environment, right?
Correct.
So those hybrids kind of work hand in hand. I usually will go private to group class, or I'll go board and train to group class, or I'll go day train to group class or privates, right? Just because it naturally adds the necessary amount of pressure and difficulty to the owners so that they have to step up to the plate, right? And that's just an example, right? Yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to give one quick example of the opposite. So let's say on the flip side, we have we have a couple clients who are friends, and each of them bought a couple Dobies from from Austria, like real pretty dogs,
Mm-hmm.
real drivey
Mm-hmm.
dogs, like mentally speaking. We did a semi-private kind of group class thing. It was just a couple of them, right? And we did
Mm-hmm.
all their
Mm-hmm.
puppy stuff because they started these dogs young. And so
Mm-hmm.
the dogs learned all their stuff. I mean, they're super young, but they're so smart and they picked everything up just fantastically. Now, now they want to get into real advanced stuff. One of them wants to do bite work, the other one just wants to do off leash work. And,
Mm-hmm.
so now we're talking more individualized things depending on each dog. So we went from semi privates to privates. You know what I
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
mean? I have had it
Mm-hmm.
before to where we start a dog with just private lessons because they're that young. And then when they're old enough, then we get into a board and train to get into the nitty gritty. The dog needs to learn how to compress, because their son has like anxiety issues, or the dog needs to learn, whatever the dog needs to learn, that it's going to be beneficial for me to have the dog and really condition them over a period of time, but not necessarily right now. When the dog is older, that's when
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to need to have this much time with them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, that's it. Those are beautiful examples. Beautiful examples. Um, what was I going to say? What do you think so this is a good one that we can compare and contrast.
Mhm.
The difference between a day training and the difference between a board and training.
Okay.
Okay. Let's talk about that.
Okay. Now let me clarify with you. So the last time I had a chance to kind of dive into your programs with you, day training, is it only Monday through Friday?
Those are a different form of day training. Different. Those are like week by week training or like
Right.
a
Well, I know you'd like keep the dog for the week. I'm talking it's daily, like the dog they drop him off in the morning, pick him up in the afternoon type thing.
Yeah. So so again, it depends on how the trainer wants to format it. Some trainers they might do a 7 day a week day training where the dog gets dropped off for 7 days. Typically, what I've seen in the industry is people do kind of something very similar to how kids go to school, right? They go to school Monday through Friday,
Right.
and then they're off on the
Okay.
weekends, right? So,
Just for clarity
yeah,
for your
like that.
question though, like what, give me the example. Are you talking about day training, meaning the dog's only there for the day, every day, 5 days a week, 7 days a week?
5 to 7 days a week,
Okay.
exactly. And then the other one is just a complete
Straight
board
up
and
board
train
and
where the
train.
dog is with you for board and train.
Excellent. Okay. So pros and cons. I think that the pro of the day training is that the day training will be a little bit less expensive than the board and train program. I think that the con, or am I right on that? Sorry, let me.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Usually,
So
yeah.
so I think a con then would be less dogs would no, let me rephrase that. Certain dogs that would qualify for board and trains or maybe be absolutely ideal candidates for a board and train maybe wouldn't qualify for day training, like an aggressive dog, right? Like a Nukas, like a snowball,
Right.
like these are dogs that we've trained in the past that are highly reactive, let's say. So,
Hmm.
pro for day training, owner gets the dog back every night. Con, owner has
Yep.
to do their homework every night. Um,
Yep.
let's see. Pro, the owner gets to do the work alongside you. It's kind of the as I see it, correct me if you think I'm wrong. Day training is probably the most even of the training, meaning you do 50%, they do 50% at the
Hmm.
same
Hmm.
time. Con is there are potential variables that we cannot account for. There
Hmm.
is a lack of momentum as I see it because board and train programs are not perfectly linear. Some days are harder on the dog than others. Um,
Hmm.
and so from a trainer's perspective, I think that it's a cool idea to offer a day training program. Um, but again, just keep in mind if I were to do day training programs, I would probably run it pretty similar to like, would this dog do well in a group class setting? And if the dog qualifies for a group class, then I think day training would also work out because a pro of day training would be you're obviously a trainer. You have other dogs, you have other distractions, you have the ability to socialize this dog like nobody's business. Whereas
Mhm.
the owner may not, or just may not have the time or the capacity, as we've talked about before. We talk about the potential tools to make that happen. I think of like, you've got certain tools, certain knowledge, certain things that would just make that process easier. Even if the owner could do it in a perfect world, just realistically, you'll do it better and safer and so on. Um,
Right.
does that answer your question?
Right. Yeah, no, I think those are perfect compare and contrasting. I think one thing I see a lot in so like day training, the typical client I see doing a successful day training, a working dog, a dog who just wants to develop certain skills, healing, sits down, stays, just a typical obedience
Mhm.
development. But this dog doesn't necessarily have any severe behavioral. There's no separation anxiety. There's no aggression. There's no heavy reactivity. There's no, high socialization needs. Like, so, the typical puppy, dog under 8 months or so can qualify, or a dog under a year can qualify for a day training program as long as there's no outstanding issues,
Right.
right? You send the kid to school Monday through Friday. He goes home, you do work with that owner on the week on Friday, give them homework for Saturday, Sunday. They drop the dog back off on Monday for school,
Right.
right? So this has been a very successful program for me over the years. But with those types of dogs, if you've tried, I have experimented with dogs with certain behavioral issues. But one thing I see across the board is I do see that day trainings tend to be longer in length. So, for example, if I were to do a 4 week board and train program,
Mhm.
right, where the dog lives with me,
Mhm.
whatever I needed that 4 weeks for takes me about 6 weeks in day training. And the reason for that is because the dogs, they lose that momentum, as you talked about. In a
Right.
board and train program, we can develop momentum. We can immediately jump to the next phase of a training because the dog is ready to receive that information. And so we're able to kind of hit that pocket, teach that dog that concept, and it's very seamless. However, anytime that the dog goes home in a day training program, they have potential for regression,
Right.
right? So it's like I'm taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back every time we do a day training program. So that's another reason why most day training programs have to be a little bit longer for the dog's conditioning and success. But also, we do need to work with the actual owners themselves to make sure that the management system and the rules are being followed week by week.
Correct.
And the dogs will kind of tell you, if you train the dog Monday through Friday and they're doing awesome on Friday evening, and then they come back Monday and they're shitty. Well, that tells you whether the owners kind of did their homework or not,
Right, and
right?
that kinda ties into whether or not the environment is conducive for training, like we've talked about before. Now, let me get
Exactly.
slightly technical for just a second, and then I'm gonna toss a question onto you, okay? So,
Sure.
to get slightly technical, I just wanted to talk about, since both of us kinda brought up momentum in training.
Hmm.
An
Hmm.
example, um, let's say you have a dog who does day training, or the dog could do a board and train program. Why is the momentum a little bit quicker, a little bit more efficient in a board and train? Well, that's because we can control the little variables that really help us eke out the last 3, 4, 5, 10% of a dog, right? Like, that's what separates, good from like excellent training, right? Because
Hmm.
most
Hmm.
dog
Hmm.
trainers, for all the flack they give each other, they mostly all do things right. It's just to get things like pretty much perfect. That changes a ton. Now, what do I
Hmm.
mean? Let's say, I think this is a trick I learned from you. Let's say
Hmm.
we have puppies in, right? This one could be day training. Mom fed him. Mom sent him to day training, and it's a pro for mom because just like the kids go to school, puppy's gone, man. I can clean the house. I can go to work. I can do whatever the hell I got to do. Here's the
Hmm.
con for the trainer: dog's fed, comes in. He's a puppy. He's food driven, but it would be nice if instead of feeding the puppy breakfast in their crate, I could just work him with his own food, because I know he's
Hmm.
hungry because he hasn't eaten since last night, and the dog is straight driven, and that's awesome because now I'm not filling the puppy up with extra treats on top of their food, meaning I don't have to
Hmm.
wait very long until lunchtime where I just do it again with the food. So like I can be a little more, and it's easier for us too because we can plan out our day, right? I've got a couple puppies in
Right.
right now. I already know I work the dogs in this order because I work the puppies first because they have to eat, whereas the other dogs can eat in their crates and I can still work them later. Like, and they'll still want to work because I'm doing other types of training anyway. So reasons like that, or let's say with an aggressive dog, a very hyper nervous dog. I work with a lot of rescues. Brent has his own foundation these days, which is awesome. And um,
Uh, Thanks. Canis Foundation. Check it
Yeah,
out.
Canis Foundation. Check it out for sure. And I'm getting there too. But for the time being, I'm with the Phoenix Metro Chamber Foundation, and I am an executive board member. Woot woot! Shout out.
Whoop, whoop.
So, but here's an example, and I think when Brent and I were like new friends to each other, man. Remember Seven? The what's it? Dog's
Yeah,
name was
yeah.
Seven, right? It was a pity.
The pit bull.
And
Yeah.
so I remember Brent was sitting. There's the big kennels. Like Brent was sitting with his back to the kennel. This dog is barking his ass off at Brent, from inside the kennel. Brent's outside the kennel. And Brent sits there until the dog stops barking, just stops barking. And then Brent throws some boiled chicken over his shoulder into the kennel and then leaves. And the dog watches him like a hawk until he leaves. And by leaves, I mean out of sight, out of another room. And we come back later, chicken's gone, you know. And over time, we're able to safely get this dog into our hands so that we can do some work. But that took time. That's not really something you could do with the day training program. If anything, it would be harder because not only do you have the option for
Yeah.
the chicken, but the dog's getting dropped off from the owner every day, man. Their territory like reflex is on alert, you know.
Yep. It's that one step forward, that 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of
Exactly.
thing. And yeah, when you're dealing with aggressive dogs, if you try to do a day training program, it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back sometimes.
Right.
But it's because the dog never gets acclimated to you. The dog never gets used to you. The dog never feels he has to actually bond or like you. But yeah, definitely, I wouldn't do with aggressive cases or behavioral cases. I wouldn't recommend a day training
Right.
program at all.
So here's my question for you then to shift gears a little bit. Is if I remember correctly, here's a little context, I guess. Petco. I don't think that this is like controversial to say because it's public information, right? How they run their group classes. It's something like $100 or $150, something like that, right? And it's 6 classes, I want to say, like per package, 6 classes. And the classes, if I'm not mistaken, are 45 minutes long, not 60. Okay. Now, $100. When Brent and I were working together for a kennel, our group class was 225 or 250. And now the reason why it was more was because it was it was actually a package. So it's kind of a hybrid because it came with a couple of private lessons included in it. Now that was it was wiggle room, right? It was cap space. It was in case somebody couldn't make it one Saturday, or in case somebody made it every single week, but they were just falling behind and needed the extra help, individualized help because it's a private lesson. And so my question to you, because I know that you wrote up those programs, was what was the inspiration for that? I'm not going to bother asking you whether or not it was helpful because it definitely was, but what brought you to that conclusion?
Yeah, so good question. So give people some context. So I definitely charge a little bit more than what you're talking about for those packages, but I'll kind of explain to you guys what the point was. So when I was first developing group classes for the old company that I developed, normally we start with basic and intermediate classes, right? So anywhere you go, there'll be basic, intermediate, advanced, but all of those labels they all change from kennel to kennel and trainer to trainer, right? Because it really has to do with what can we develop within any specific curriculum. So level 1, level 2, level 3, basic, intermediate, advanced, whatever you want to call it. And it's funny because when you look to some of the chains, their advanced training is what I teach in my basic obedience. So it's kind of interesting because it's based on what training style, method, knowledge, and all that stuff it is that you have, right? So one thing that I really wanted to create at my old company, and I actually still have it till today with my new company, is I wanted to motivate people to, if they're going to take the task to train their own dogs, I wanted to motivate them to be all in. So what I did is I came up with a ridiculous package for them where I said, if you guys prepay for both basic class and intermediate class, I will throw in 2 private sessions for free. Okay. Now, the reason I did this was because I wanted their success, right? Because I lost money on these things. I lost money. But the reality of it is I saw that let's say each of my classes are 6 weeks long, right? So my basic obedience is 6 weeks and my intermediate is 6 weeks. The likelihood that someone might miss a class in 12 weeks is very high. Right. So those 2 private sessions, a majority of private sessions were used to actually make up classes that people missed. right? And they had to do it, on my time when I had availabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So it wasn't too much, of my time wasted, right? Or money lost, right?
Mhm, mhm.
But what I wanted to do is I wanted to give people a really outrageous offer where they literally got 300 to $350 in savings just by signing up for a package, so that they could commit to their dog. Right. So when I had people sign up for our group class, they had options midway through our basic group class to sign up for the packages just so that I could get their commitment. Because what I've realized is when I get people's commitment in classes, these people take it all the way. And these people are the ones that are super impressed by their dogs. These are the people that refer me to their friends and their family and all that stuff. So it's kind of a win-win-win situation where I win in the sense of I get to help this person. They win because they committed. The dog looks really impressive, and then it comes back and they give me more referrals. So it ends up becoming this the best idea is the one that helps everybody,
Right.
right? And so it was worth it for me to give away free private sessions as an incentive, to help these people kind of develop, to commit to their dogs, be it a rescue or a new puppy. If they commit the time and actually work with the dog, we know that the likelihood of that dog not being returned to the shelter, or the likelihood of that dog, not being surrendered or, rehomed, whatever it is a lot lower if they commit
Mhm,
upfront.
mhm. Absolutely,
Yeah.
and I've noticed that kind of thing with private lessons too. Maybe that's another quick note for younger trainers is that's
Mhm.
why you notice.
Get them to do a package.
Right.
Get them to do a
Exactly.
package.
Otherwise, it's like, "Let's do this week," and then 2 weeks in, "Oh, you know
And
what? I have
then
to wait." Right,
exactly.
and then you just
You got to get the commitment. If you don't get the commitment, you will fail
right.
as a dog trainer.
Absolutely,
You will
and
fail.
you're
Yep.
absolutely right, it just looks bad on you anyway, whereas the dog is better,
Mhm.
and not only does that look good for you from a business standpoint, but the dog is better, right? That's
Mhm.
what we
Mhm.
want.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely, and my last question to you then, I think, is gonna be when you're when you're designing these kinds of things, I've gotten this question a lot. I think I was telling you the other day, a couple people reached out to me, and if you listen to this, I need to get back to you, and I'm very sorry. A couple people emailed me their resumes, and they were like, "Hey,
Mhm.
I want to be a trainer, or I was working at a kennel and I want to start training. Have you got any openings for me?" Um, so my question then for you is, how do you get like a group class started out of nowhere? Like once they're going, it's easy
Mhm.
because you've
Mhm.
got kind of enrollment, people sign up for the times and whatever. When you've got like one or two people here and there that are asking if you've got group classes, but not enough to maybe start a group class, how do you go about the messy process of putting 6 to 9 people together for one particular time for 6 weeks in a row?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. If you've never done a group class before, there is no better way to figure it out versus there's no better way to figure it out than doing 2 to 3 people group
Right,
classes.
right. Absolutely.
Right? So I remember, I remember when I was at my old company, there were times where, we kept pushing back the date because we didn't have enough enrollment in group classes, but at the same time, they weren't marketing group classes.
Mm,
So I talked to the management team. I said, guys, we need to market for group classes. So maybe we got 2 or 3 inquiries. We got those people to sign up, for at least just the starter level, the entry level group classes. So they start up for entry level group class, which was great. And I remember the rule was, the rule that I was taught is you have to have at least 4 people in your group class or else you're losing money. Well, at that point,
right,
I didn't care if I lost money because my goal was I wanted to get better as a teacher, educator, and as the host of a group class, right? As the MC of a group class.
right,
So the idea is if I had 2 people, I did a 2-person semi-private group class, right? If I had 3 people, I did it this way. And what it allowed me to do, it allowed me to build up my chops being around groups of people and managing different numbers of dogs and managing different types of personalities. I think my nature is very much like I like to entertain people. So I like to connect, entertain, talk to people, ask them their opinions. I like people when they come in my group class, they had a good time and their dog's fucking trained, right? So that's how I am. But
right,
building that up, there definitely was many times I was training, 2 people. Because it's funny, this transition from a private session to training a client with 2 dogs. So you get a husband and a wife. and they have 2 dogs. Well, you can kind of almost treat that as a group class, right? And
Right,
then let's
right.
say you have 3 dogs, and then 4 dogs, and then 5 dogs. And I think as the better you get developing your ability to multitask in your head, right? Because I think about when I was learning to do group classes, once you know the curriculum, you're fine, right? Once you kind of know how to pivot and try things out, and you learn that just simply through training dogs. If this happens, I would do this. If
Hmm.
the dog's not sitting, I'll do that. So solutions. Once you have a long list of solutions, then when you start interacting with people, now it's a matter of like rapid fires. Think of kind of like a Q&A on like a Instagram live or on a YouTube live, right? People are just rapid firing answers to their clients. Well, there is a part of group classes that is kind of like that. However, you also learn how to structure the group class where you can push the curriculum forward, right? Because sometimes you can get bombarded with, I have this question, and none of the questions are related to each other.
Hmm.
So now you just end up on tangents left and right. So yeah, to answer your question, the way that I designed those group classes was literally by experimenting with 2, 3, 4 clients at a time and trying to see, okay, what standards are we capable of teaching?
Right.
You
X amount
know,
of dogs. Right.
an X amount of dogs in X amount of
Right.
time, right? There was a time where I had a 4-week group class and I realized it wasn't enough. Then there was a time I had an 8-week group class. I realized it was too much. So we kind of find a sweet spot at 5 to 6 weeks. But again, it depends on what it is your standard is you're trying to train.
Right.
If you're trying to train an off leash dog in 6 weeks, that's a very ambitious project, right? If you're trying to train an off leash dog in 12 weeks, probably
Right.
better,
Right.
probably more realistic. If you're trying to train the dog in 18 weeks, even more realistic. So it really depends. It's up to you as the trainer, your knowledge, your skill set, how many classes you want to break your curriculum up into, and so to get people to be able to digest that curriculum so that they will be successful,
Okay. Yeah.
and in turn you will be successful
Absolutely.
as a teacher.
And I think that it's worth mentioning too that when we talk about X amount of dogs, X amount of time, X amount of experience matters too, because what I
Mm-hmm.
noticed leads to success in a group class. Because my first group class, I was telling Brent, it was actually for the city that I lived in. The Parks and Rec district and I worked out a group class, so they did all the marketing and everything for me, and so my classes were full. And these were the first group classes that I had ever run like by myself,
Nice.
Um, and so definitely, I do notice that I knew everything. I mean, for the basic obedience that we were doing, because I'm definitely a better trainer now than I was then, but I was good enough then to teach the dogs what I needed to teach them at that time.
Right.
However,
Right.
I can run a much cleaner and quicker group class than I did at that time. A little bit clunky. I was kind of figuring things out. And I noticed that a lot of it was either because experience taught me uh, what to explain to clients, what to emphasize. When we talk about troubleshooting, you know what to do, but how to convey that to the client in the easiest, simplest way possible. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, how to move them through the phases of training and when, and just in general, I think running a group class does amazing things for teaching a trainer how to a healthy pace to push. And that's something that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
stays
A
useful to
healthy
you.
pace to push. Very important. A healthy pace to push. I hope that needs to be in a fucking book. That was great. Sorry. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, you're good. Yeah, well, let's write the book, dude. So the
Yeah.
healthy pace to push, and that is something that absolutely carries on, I think, to private lessons as well. I've noticed
Yeah.
hugely whenever I've sat with younger trainers. People come to you and ask you if you can do privates with them, right? Um, they do the lesson, the dog learns what they need to learn, but this 90-minute lesson could have been 60 minutes long, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And if it was
Mm-hmm.
60 minutes long, without missing any of the information, mind you, the momentum would have been more natural, would have been more fun, would have been more upbeat and energetic. And so
Mm-hmm.
the clients would have had a better experience anyway. And you would have saved
Right.
time and blah, 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 blah. So learning how to push that, learning what information to leave out, like you were saying,
Mm-hmm.
you guys are
Mm-hmm.
asking questions. So I'll get to that later. I'll get to that next week or whatever, and keep things on point. It makes the
Mm-hmm.
experience better. And it's an invaluable skill to learn. If you're not sure about running group classes, definitely look into developing that skill, at least learning how to push that pace one way or another. And if you're nervous about it, go to one, take your dog and go to group class and see how people do it.
Yep. And see how it's done.
Right.
Exactly. I think that's the best way to learn, to be very honest. If you guys don't have a trainer in your area to mentor or to see kind of how the structure goes, that's great. Great idea. Just sign up for one. Sign up for one for a trainer local that you feel is knowledgeable, and see how they run it. That's very smart.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, we really hope that this episode was helpful for you guys. I think, running across this question over and over when we mentor dog trainers, this is something that we're really passionate on just sharing with you guys. We hope that this episode was helpful. Any other last words before I sign off that you want to say, Mariano?
No, man, it's good to have us back.
Yeah, good to have us back. We're so happy to have you guys back. We want to thank everybody again for listening. If you guys found that this was valuable, if you guys have any dog, this is a very dog trainer oriented episode. Go ahead and share it with one of your dog trainer friends. It's someone that you knew that you trained with at an old kennel, or another trainer that you had at a rescue, or one of your friends who's trying to start a training or dog walking business. Send this to them, because we really think that this would be helpful, at least helping you wrap your head around different programs that you could offer or should offer or recommend to your clients. All right. Go ahead. Thank you guys so much again. This is episode 31, how to pick your program. And we can't wait to see you guys in episode 32. All right. My name is Brent LaBrada, and that guy over there is Mariano Alvarez, and we will see you guys next time. Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
We really hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we hope to see you back for the next one. But in the meantime, please follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Dog Trainers Podcast. Go ahead and leave a comment. Ask us any questions that you want. We would love to connect with our dog trainer communities all around the world. Take care, guys. We'll see you next time.